My name is Shay Wesley Martin. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a graduate research associate at the QualLab, a research center focusing on advancing qualitative inquiry toward innovation, equity, diversity, and justice at The Ohio State University's College of Education and Human Ecology. Joining us today is Dr. Leslie Morrow, a postdoctoral fellow in the College of Education and Human Ecology, who will soon offer her lecture, Navigating the Paradox, Black Queer Revolutionary Selfhood and the Limits of Diversity. So I just want to go over our agenda before we jump in. So first, we'll have some words of welcome from the director of the QualLab, Dr. Penny Pasquet. Then I will give just some housekeeping notes for the lunch talk before Dr. Morrow gives her presentation. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session, so you have the opportunity to ask questions. And then I'll close today's lunch talk by telling you how you can get involved in the QualLab. And so I'll turn it over to our director.
Thank you so much, Shay, and thank you so much for your labor with the QualLab Lunch entire series, including today. I am very excited about today, and as we come together, want to really pay attention to acknowledging the land and the histories of where we all are and where you all are located. And I think it's important to give a moment to the current space where the QualLab lands, which is the traditional homeland of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandotte, Ojibwe, and many nations, and the Trail of Tears and all that our complex history means. I put in the chat a publication that came out recently that really thinks about the land in the current moment in terms of universities and where we are, as well as this is a time to pay attention to, as is always, the global issues of land and really educating ourselves and making sure that we're paying attention to the people, the land, and all that is happening in the world. So with that, thank you for being here and your intentions with all this. With the QualLab, I do want to share a little bit about who we are. So I founded it with support of the dean here at the College of Human Ecology, Education and Human Ecology, and started it just 3.5 years ago. So it has not been around long. We're small and part-time team, but we are very mighty and doing so many exciting things for the college as well as beyond. So we specialize in really advancing qualitative methodologies and methods and inquiry for faculty, students, and staff within the college, where we'll do consultations for your research teams, be written into grants and things like that. And it's free for people in the college. Outside of that, we have stopped, but now we're starting again, offering it for a fee. Again, it's, financial times, it's tough. So we make sure to talk with you and can share any of that information if you want to know about that. We do think about all methodologies and methods and specifically focus on qualitative inquiry toward education, equity, diversity, and justice, and what that means for our methodologies and methods to match the topics that we're talking about and what that means for each of the people that we work with. We also do things like the QualLab Lunch series, have a dashboard of resources, and so many things. So please check out our website. There's lots of videos, including the one that we'll add from today. I think am I throwing it back? Oh, and so I talked a little bit already about what we do. Please take a look at this. And I know at the end, Shay will talk more about the Empower Hour and other ways that you could get involved. So I'm excited about that and welcome you here. Thank you.
All right, just some housekeeping notes. So please, this is a Zoom meeting, so please turn off your microphone during the presentation, but please feel free to share any questions or comments using the chat space. At the end of Dr. Morrow's talk, the QualLab team will surface the questions from the chat. During the Q&A, you are also welcome to unmute and ask your questions. The session is being recorded and you can access it on our YouTube channel after the session, about a week after. Closed captioning is provided during the session. You can access it by clicking live transcript. on the lower right corner of your own video box. Please feel free to turn it on and off as you see fit. And so now I get the pleasure of welcoming our distinguished guest speaker. And so Dr. Leslie K. Morrow is currently a Dean's Diversity Postdoctoral Fellow in the College of Education and Human Ecology at The Ohio State University. She received her doctoral degree in educational policy studies, focusing on social and cultural studies of education with minors in gender and women's studies and queer studies from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research and praxis as a Black queer academic explores lived experiences, labor, and strategies of resistance of historically disenfranchised groups, especially Black queer folks in higher education. Her work is interdisciplinary in nature, informed by Black feminisms, and offers an alternative approach to doing and thinking about research that examines feeling and being different and challenges dominant discourses of normativity and professionalism within higher education. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Morrow. The floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. Let me get this share screen thing going on again. One moment. Oh, here we go, your slideshow. Okay. All right. Thank you again to Dr. Penny Pasquet, Shay, and the entire QualLab team. It is indeed an honor to be here and share space with you today. I'm, again, thinking about the work and the mission of the QualLab really falls in line with the topic that I'll be addressing today. And thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day to be here. I know how busy we are, and again, want to acknowledge the stolen lands that we reside upon. So I do have, in full transparency, I'm working here with a dual screen and may read and will read from time to time, hopefully to keep me within the time parameters set out for the presentation. So I just want folks to realize that. As you can see, the title here on the slide, Navigating the Paradox, Black Queer Revolutionary Selfhood and the Limits of Diversity. And I'll just jump right in thinking about what brought me to the topic, right? Starting off, in a world where the pages of history have been dominated by the narratives of heroes, leaders, and martyrs, more often than not, male, identified and white, it was important for me to pause and reflect upon the often hidden and tireless work of Black, queer, and gender expansive folks in the academy and beyond. So this talk is based upon an article pulled from my dissertation in which, in my ongoing research interest, where I examine the experiences of Black, queer, and gender expansive educators, an examination that began as a search for others like me. And so I was aware that there are, many studies out there in which they focus on students, and I really wanted to think about the educators who are doing that work to be there for the students, but often their needs go unrecognized and unfulfilled. And I wanted to illuminate the strategies, right, that they use to resist the status quo, how they expose harms inflicted by state power and navigate the paradox that is the university, which claims inclusion as a value, even as it continues to exclude and also its elitism. So embracing a Black feminist framework, I center Black, queer, and gender expansive folks who are often dismissed, erased, and rendered invisible. And yet they are working tirelessly to leave this world in a better place. Their everyday work focused on injustices against Black, Brown, Native, Indigenous, and other communities of color, addressing the oppressions within the academy and making connections to their surrounding communities. In response to campus and community calls for action, participants examine these injustices through Black feminist, intersectional, and queer frameworks. and supported growing student unrest and campus social movements that address gaps in the curriculum, reproductive justice, efforts to suppress the vote, particularly of Black voters, and the racial injustices fueled by police violence, as well as the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, they joined community efforts by calling attention to the water crises in Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi, raising awareness in regards to the ongoing liberation struggles in Gaza, pro-immigration, raising awareness of the unsolved murders of Black and Brown trans women and the missing and murdered Native and Indigenous women, just to name a few. And often their desires to call attention to these efforts place them in precarious situations. So getting back to this paradox, right? Even as colleges and universities attempt with questionable success to include populations long excluded from their offerings, they remain invested, as I've already mentioned, in their notions of exclusivity and elitism. In that sense, a guiding question for me doing this work asked the same question as Sarah Ahmed in her book on Being Included, Racism and Diversity in Institutional Life. So what exactly does diversity do? Seemingly, diversity, equity, and inclusion are alleged university values that claim to welcome those with different life experiences, abilities, beliefs, and so on. These values then create conditions that often prevent Black queer educators from bringing their whole selves into academic spaces, specifically in the previous examples that I mentioned. And I'll get more into the voices of some of those participants who faced threats, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. So this paradox where universities claim to be welcoming, right? While upholding harmful norms, participants discuss their experiences with diversity rhetoric within the academy that mask the injustices of the institution, that perpetuate historical violences, that stall their justice work, preferring instead that we fall in line, accept the status quo, assimilate, and become complacent in the institutions that were designed by people, sorry, as I switch papers here, that were designed by folks who never imagined people like us would ever gain access to them. Further, my participants expose the who that is not served by institutional or mainstream diversity work. As such, the limitations of mainstream diversity exposes this gap between universities' commitment to diversity and the lived realities of Black queer educators. So by exposing this gap, I came to understand that institutional diversity work is often more about a focus on numbers and compliance with without addressing the systemic issues, right, or the power dynamics that impact the lives of these educators within the academy. So that is the effects of the corporatization of the university are layered and felt differently. When hired to do the diversity work, not being allowed to do the work that they were hired to do, and being surveilled for looking like the folks that the institution is purportedly interested in welcoming. Thus, representation cannot be the end goal, and it certainly cannot be the only goal. So getting into Black Queer Revolutionary Selfhood, it formed this methodology for me that allowed me to pay attention to how the participants were grappling and trying to navigate these environments. And so a little bit about of how I arrived at this project, right? Often, you know, working within the professional spaces from my past, I often felt isolated and alone. And, you know, was always that one, you know, if I see something, I'm going to say something. And the number of times that it got me into trouble, I've lost count. and, not feeling like, I had, friends, I had colleagues that I could vent a little to, right? But not really being able to kind of fully express what I was encountering. And so the opportunities to connect with folks at conferences, during writing retreats, really became a valuable source of community, and hope to figure out like how we're going to make it through, right? And so I recall a presentation years ago where I was on this panel, how you're often situated with folks that you don't know, but it ended up, working out gloriously because we were all kind of talking about how we were navigating the higher education as, Black and brown queer women. And the session chair essentially, at the time for discussion said, well, why are you here? And so I actually flipped that. That did become a chapter within my dissertation where I said, this is why we stay, right? And so as we're talking and meeting up with folks, we recognize that a lot of what we are experiencing, at least, from our viewpoints, right? That's not to say that we know that there are several other groups that encounter, similar atrocities, right? But we were missing our voice and our experiences and our perspectives. So we started presenting at conferences, and then many of us were different stages of our doctoral work, and so as I started to engage with my project, the project changed quite drastically because at first I was kind of steered to do something that I just didn't feel passionate about, and I kept coming back to this, the experiences that I had, and being able to talk with others who felt similarly, and have that space and that comfort to fully be able to vent and be ourselves, and wishing we had those similar connections on campus. So that brings me to Black Queer Revolutionary Selfhood, right? And we were aware of clearly how institutional diversity often restricted our speech, erased and abused our labor, and the attempts to inscribe boundaries between our professional and personal lives, many of which the participants, were told outright to check our politics at the door. So I wanted to find a way to grasp and acknowledge and center the humanity of these participants in ways that they were not finding within their professional lives. And some could say clearly, that's we shouldn't expect that, right? But the reality is there's so many people that are able to show up and be who they are without fear and without apology. And so why can't we, right? So those were some of the questions that we, started putting out there. So I wanted to pay attention to the different ways they were presenting their truths. And so some folks talked often about, being in meetings and being silent intentionally, or not even attending meetings at all, right? Or if they, were there to maybe give a slight head nod or a smile, in an effort to, play nice, if you will, to perform. And so where some might see that as agreement, it was clearly a defense mechanism. And so, we talked about several situations, and while this might seem benign to some, or so what, this was really a fundamental aspect of talking with these participants and finding out, like, not being able to have at least one other person, right, who gets it, who you could, give that look across the table, amidst, whatever harm is being perpetrated in that space. And so many folks talked about that and how important it was, and how they lack the community, really. And so the fears that they were having to navigate regarding their personal livelihood, certainly a large part of the project too talked about the retaliation that they faced and the precarious positions that they were put in, because, despite these harms, this was something that they valued, that it wasn't just a job for them, right? This was really something that permeates their everyday lives, and just understanding what justice, true justice looks like, right? And it's not many of these fancy worded statements that were being, put out. And so let me also clarify that this was, a time right before the pandemic, right before the shutdown. So I can't even imagine, and it's actually, which I can talk about more later, a future project that I want to investigate now with all of the anti-DEI legislation, anti-CRT, anti-everything really. So something that I want to revisit with all of that's going on. But for many, again, not being in community and not feeling as if they were welcome really had an impact on their self-esteem, right? Their psyche. They began to doubt their knowledge and skills, and mistrust for them, because there are a variety of examples that they provided, really shaped their entire, professional lives. And so, as you can imagine, that had, emotional, mental, and physical tolls. And so, folks, were contemplating, do I stay? How can I perform under the radar just to get by? And having to deal with being called angry or divisive, not a team player. And these were just some of the nicer terms that were thrown at them. So the inspiration comes from a variety of sources. I had a wonderful doctoral committee, folks that I'm still in conversation with today, that really supported this project, that really helped me think about it deeply, and continue to ask questions of me today. And so I see Black Queer Revolutionary Selfhood as it's mapping and analyzing, right, the multiple and nuanced ways that Black, queer, and gender expansive educators, again, as I've said before, often left out of the scholarship, how they are experiencing working in these spaces of mainstream and institutional diversity work, whether that's as an administrator, a graduate student, or a faculty member. And I can say more about the participants if you would want to know that information. And so really thinking about like how they are doing their work and experiencing the work. And so a concept formulated, developed by my doctoral advisor, the Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown, to know and remember. And so really going into these spaces of thinking about our ancestors, thinking about, those that we've lost, but, in the use of this concept in her study on Black girlhood, particularly Soul Hot, Saving Our Lives, Here Are Truths, a collective for Black girls to create, to express, and to make space. And if you know, but definitely check it out. I borrowed from Dr. Brown in that sense to demonstrate my emphasis on amplifying marginalized and historically disenfranchised voices, because she understands that when you can reflect on your own life, you will articulate these radically different ideas about your lived experience than is often the narratives that are in circulation or that are being relayed and portrayed, right? And so again, that presented this very delicate line of how do I amplify their voice and yet not put them right on people's radar. And so that was something that I wrote about extensively, would journal about, because I didn't want to further place these participants in more harm. And also in thinking about embracing our deviance, that's a concept from political science scientist Dr. Kathy Cohen, who says, um, writes about deviance as the witness to the power of those at the bottom, and whose everyday life decisions challenge or at least counter the basic normative assumptions of a society that's bent on maintaining the status quo, right? So this, was fundamental within Black Queer Revolutionary Selfhood to describe participants' meaning making, their understanding, and navigating within spaces and places in which defied they defied the policing of their bodies, grappled with the constraints upon their labor, and faced constant disciplining in their pursuit of justice for all. And so for this slide and talking about the methods, again, I had the wonderful opportunity of my committee members, but also in the later stages of finishing up the dissertation and preparing for the defense, I worked with an academic coach who was fundamental in helping me come up with Black Queer Revolutionary Selfhood, but also in thinking about participatory ethnography in a different way. So inspired by Black feminisms and critical race theory, she helped me to utilize and not be ashamed of the emotional connection, the role that it plays in how and what I research, right? Like this project to me was very personal. And rather than, I did write a positional statement, but to not shy away from owning who I am and why that was of value to the project, right? And so it also allowed me to then think about how to use these methods in a way to seek community uplift. So in working with participants, it was also a space to honor um, who they are and how they wish to be represented. And so I'm very thankful to Dr. Nadine Neighbor, faculty member at the University of Illinois, Chicago, because she understood my intention and my desire to think about this project and co-construct knowledge, awareness, and understanding because of the mutual investment that myself and my participants had in securing justice and in working in ways to think about projects, whether that was writing projects, conference presentations, community engagement to seek justice for all, right? And so I might have started, right, with my research questions and an idea, but I was very open to the shifts, the twists, and the turns presented by my participants when we were in conversation and working on this project, to be open to, you know what, I'm not feeling that today. This is what's going on. You won't believe what just happened, in my neighborhood. And then we would go off in that direction. And so to use the method in that way, I think was it allowed me to go even deeper, to really gain their trust in ways that I never expected to, and for them to be really vulnerable in working through some of the fears that they had, or again reliving some of the trauma, unfortunately, that they had to endure. I also wanted to embrace with editors Brown, Carducci, and Kubi with their book, Disrupting Qualitative Inquiry, Possibilities, Intentions, and Educational Research to be and to do disruptive work. So there are several chapters in that book that were also influential in how I was thinking about setting up this project and wanting to conduct it in ways that challenges the dominant narratives that are out there, create space for alternative perspectives, and that goes against in many ways the traditional research methods in some of the classes that I had to take and that were required, right? So it really allowed me to emphasize self-reflection and storytelling. allowed me to center Black queer joy, which I will talk more about later on, but and use their art-based approaches, like any way that they were coming in, the community collaborations, their poetry, their journaling, all were essential to telling the story, right, and getting it out there. And so the last, well, not the last, but I think the most, obviously, most important aspect of this are the participants, right? And so before I read the slide to give a little background about this participant, I'm going to focus on a few of their experiences that really shaped the project. And so for this particular participant, they had not planned at all whatsoever to enter higher education. They were planning to, unseat a racist history teacher at their high school, and realized that the system, was horrible, and that they, in their words, faced a higher calling, and decided to pursue higher education and be there. And be the person, and many of them said this, right, without knowing one another, to be the person they needed. So they say, in that moment, I chose to fully go for the life that I wanted for myself. I have to be able to breathe wherever I am. I know not everybody on campus loves seeing me suited and booted. And so they talk about this otherness that they were already tagged with, based on the way they dress, the way they present, for who they love, being Black, being identified as a cis Black woman. All of these things played a role in how they were treated, how they were talked about behind closed doors, and oftentimes not behind closed doors. But for them, at the end of the day, in order for them to do the work that was most meaningful, they just had to be themselves. And that was a hard and long lesson, again, in their words, and ultimately saying they were failed by a system that doesn't allow for more people that look like them to be there. So one of the primary interventions that participants discussed was being allowed to show up in their full truth, to be themselves, to have the experiences and to have the interests that often challenge and disrupt what is normally accepted, right, within the academy. And so this participant, talks about, as dangerous as it is and as it can be, we cannot hide. For the next participant, they say, I am always and already not professional. I'm not a man. I'm not straight. I'm not white. I'm not middle or upper middle class. I don't fit the boxes. And with that knowledge, what are you telling me I have to be in order to be successful in this field? So this particular participant is really grappling with next steps as far as their career. And so, they hold dear to them the fact that they are the first in their family to go to an institution of higher education and then go on and get an advanced degree. And then stay working in higher ed for the things that they learn from, as they described, like great faculty members who saw me, who understood what I was going through and who were there for me. And then obviously finding a group of folks to be with, to learn more about who they are, right, and were. And so they're in this position now of where they are taking care of not only their partner, but their family, because of the position that they're in, that other family members, weren't able to access. And yet, they, have these beliefs, right, about justice that contradict what mainstream diversity tells us is important and that matters. And they are really, grappling with the mixed messages that they are receiving with regards to, these, like I said, these polished announcements and declarations, and then when you actually try to put it into action, are then, halted, are seen as disruptive, as not a team player. And so they are really trying to like evaluate, because the impact to their livelihood doesn't only affect them and their partner, but their family, that includes their mother and siblings, and just really, wrestling with, why, how are we defining success, right? Like, what are those metrics? Because that, of course, they weren't learning that in the classroom when they were obtaining the degrees. But, of course, we talk about that as the hidden curriculum, right? And how in full honesty can they then, encourage others to follow in their path. So this is something that I know that they're still grappling with. I mean, they've changed institutions, but we all know that these problems are everywhere, right? And so for this next participant, I want to make sure I'm good on time here. They talk about the campus culture has always told me that I don't belong. So that feels familiar. The goal of this is to silence me, to stifle me. They want to shut me down. They want me to be quiet. And I know I'm going through these pretty quickly, so please feel free in the discussion to ask more questions. But this participant, and again, I want to be fully transparent, is actually a treasured friend and colleague. And so I knew of the experiences that they were going through because it was very public. And I was concerned about having them participate in the project because I did not want to, A, re-traumatize them, but B, and more importantly, call attention to them again and putting them back in this really uncomfortable spotlight that they had to endure multiple death threats, people coming by, finding out where they lived, for them and their partner and family. I mean, it was a really scary time. And yet they never backed down. As hard as it was. So again, I talked about the death threats, the demotions, firings, and colleagues that abandoned them. Despite all of that, they um, held fast to their beliefs. They identify as a community activist first and a diversity practitioner second. They firmly believe that you have to bring these, various liberation struggles to the campus in order to begin that transformation. And they, recognize that many times they've been disciplined for doing so and going against, what is allowable and preferred. And we had talked, many times just as they were going through it before I had really dreamt of where I was going to be with the project. But it was their way of not only closure, but they're like, I got through it. I, have that core group of people, though I thought it was bigger. But a real core, smaller group core of people that they understood and that were there for them. But it's their way of saying, I don't want anybody else to ever have to go through that. So let this be a lesson. These are things that I would do differently. These are things that I would that would stay the same. And I was just blown away by that resolve because I'd like to think that I will be that person as well. But I mean, I just can't begin to tell you the depths of what they experienced, what was thrown their way, and still to come out and say, no, at the end of the day, I wouldn't change anything, which leads me to Black Queer Joy. And thinking about, so this is, I'll be honest, this is a process. I don't know that I fully have bought into it yet. And I think in part, it's still, I haven't been able to let go of my rage, of my anger, of my disappointment in the ways that I have been treated in the past, to get to this point. But you know, I talked earlier of working with an academic coach, and we were, you know, talking about a lot of this during the lockdown. So, you know, as you can imagine, all of the things that were going on at that time. And I had a colleague of mine, and I know I'm getting close to time, so I apologize. But I had a colleague of mine that did this, you know, weekly like roll call to text or Zoom with people to check in on everyone. And so I decided to do the same thing with a few of my participants that were involved in the project. And so, you know, we checked in. I wanted to see how they were doing. And they shared with me what was going on in their lives. And so a lot of that was, you know, just trying to make it day by day, right? Just trying to be there for themselves, to be there for their students, in this, you know, new world at that time, right, of Zoom. And so for them, Black Queer Joy. So you know, I was kind of wrestling with, you know, how do we talk about this? And I had given a presentation prior to that where one of the participants said, "It's just so depressing." And it was a faculty member, not anyone on my committee, but I was annoyed and mad. And then I sat with that and I was sharing that when we were together, and they're like, no, no, like turn that around. You know, because these are our lives, and we're not depressed. You know, we know the one thing that they can't take away from us, and that's our Black queer joy. And that's why they, you know, hate us, right? And you know, I was just stunned, right? I was so taken aback by like, yeah, like let's flip this. And so for them, it's about centering the experiences of Black queer and gender expansive folk, Black queer joy as a resistance, but it's not merely a critique, right? It is about creating community. It is about this hope. It's our way to disrupt these harmful stereotypes and deconstruct the dominant narratives and challenge these power dynamics. So it was, it was, and it is this way of working towards our freedom. And so as I near the end here, I want to end with this slide. And so for those who don't know, on the slide, this is Pat Parker. And Pat Parker really helped me jumpstart this work. And so, you know, I continue to task myself by asking like what it means to dream, to imagine, and to reimagine our present as well as future. And so allow me to read her response to a colleague who wanted to know what was her personal idea of revolution, to which Pat Parker says, "If I could take all my parts with me when I go somewhere and not have to say to one of them, 'No, you stay home tonight. You won't be welcome because I'm going to an all-white party where I can be gay, but not Black, or I'm going to a Black poetry reading and half the poets are anti-homosexual, or thousands of situations where something of what I am cannot come along. The day all the different parts of me can come along, we would have what I would call a revolution." Thank you all.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I love that.
Thank you.
So we have about we'll say like 7 or 8 minutes for questions. And so if you do have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Or actually you can also just come off mute, unmute yourself and ask them as well. And so while people are getting their questions ready, I would love to know more kind of about the you mentioned just like the journaling that you did that guided kind of your reflexive work when engaging. Could you talk more about that and why it was important to you when doing this inquiry?
So, you know, I think like I talked about the participants, and a lot of that too could certainly be myself, right? Of having to kind of deal with this imposter syndrome, if you will. And so I always kind of feel like I have to like make it perfect, make it right. And one of my committee members was like, no, like, journal, get the words out there on the page, get the raw feeling. Cause that's, in that first go around or first, second round, no, it may not be grammatically, correct, but it's where the passion, it's a lot of where your ideas are, and then work with it from there. And so, it was really necessary to just kind of think about, what I'm feeling and why I'm feeling, and then to write that then and there, instead of shoveling it away, which is something that I would often do and suppress. And that's no good for, it's certainly no good for me, and it's no good for anyone else. And so many of my participants, talked about their journal. And so it was really kind of an inspiration from committee members and participants who, even while we were working together or I was interviewing them, would have their journal handy. And so it became this practice. And especially, I think, during the lockdown, it was just a way for me to um, begin to figure out the things that I needed and wanted. And so, some of them were personal thoughts. A lot of times it was just like ideas that I had about, oh, I think it could go this way, or the next time I talk to so and so, I'm gonna have to remember to ask. So that's what the process meant and did for me.
Thank you so much for answering that.
Welcome.
If anyone has questions, feel free to cut me off, but I do have a lot of questions, so I'm here for it. Great, Natalie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I go by any pronouns. This was so lovely to hear, and just thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you.
I was wondering, I know you mentioned at the end that like this Black queer joy as like this kind of radical resistance, and as someone kind of like hoping to, and currently hoping to kind of study that radicalism from the start. I was wondering like how you entered into the conversations, like how you entered into meeting with these people, probably knowing that joy, hopefully knowing that joy was going to come into this conversation. Like, I guess, like, what would you hope to, if you were to kind of like continue these conversations, what would you kind of hope to achieve from that? Or I don't know if my question's coming out right, but I just want to talk more and hear more from you.
Well, I mean, I'll try to answer it best I can. So if it doesn't, then, stop me. In part, I think, okay, so like I said, like the last participant in particular, we have had just a wonderful relationship over the years. And like I said, I was, was able to kind of bear witness in real time what they were going through because of their justice work on campus. And so I knew from them that, I mean, these were well, it ended up that everyone that I interviewed was kind of put on this pedestal, but they were already on this pedestal, right? Of kind of like, the person I wanted to be in some ways because of their embrace of this, radical notion of joy and love. And I wasn't there. I was like, what do you mean love and joy is going to be like what gets us through? Like, I just didn't, as much as I, can quote bell hooks and so many other people that have said just that, right? I still wasn't buying in to it. And again, I firmly am aware of the anger that I still carry. But it was that participant that was like, you got to let that go. Like, just see everything that I've just gone through. And that's not to negate or dismiss what you have gone through and are going through, but you have to let that go, because it's not about just winning, because that's an aspect of it, right? But it is about taking care of you And if you don't love yourself, if you don't have the joy in being who you are in all like aspects, and then you can't really say, show up as your full self. And, I'm sitting there and, and I'm like, wait a minute, I thought I was supposed to be doing, the interview, like this is my work. So, yeah, I think I just had to, sit with that. And, again, that was something I was like, okay, I need to add this. Not as kind of like to respond to the person who says this is so depressing, but because it is necessary, because we are worthy. Because I don't think we think that enough. We might say it, and like I'm a person who says it until I finally believe it. But like everyone, it was woven through, and it wasn't a question that I initially started off with. I didn't even think it would enter the conversation, but it became very important. And since then, it's something that I cling to, because how else are we going to manage these times? I don't know if that answered, but that's where I was at. Thank you. Thank you. That's a great question.
I also think that is a lovely place to pause for now. I don't want to say stop, but pause. I am feeling like empowered to go seek joy, and I'm sure other folks are as well. And so I appreciate that so much, because there's not a lot of joy, right, in academic spaces. And so just that reminder is so helpful as we engage in critical qualitative inquiry as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we go, y'all, let me share my screen again and give you all some reminders. All right. All right, so if you want to learn more about Dr. Morrow's work, we have a QR code on the screen where you can scan and read an article published last year in Theory, Research, and Action in Urban Education. It's wonderful. You all should go check it out. Additionally, next time we have a QualLab lunch is on Thursday, April 18th. Same time, same place. Dr. John Wargo from the University of Michigan will be with us talking about this idea of misreading and recalibrating the body in play, thinking about escape and escape rooms. It'll be definitely something worth checking out and attending, so please do register for that. Also, we have so many different opportunities to get involved with the QualLab. So actually tonight, or this afternoon, we have Empower Hours in the QualLab in Ramsire in our offices, which are communities, it's a community space, our community gathering for EHE graduate students to come and talk about questions and hiccups that you're experiencing in your research, things that you've been afraid to ask in class, and just a way to connect with other students. Tonight, we are talking about logic of inquiry and how to design a congruent study. We also have open consultation hours every first and third Wednesday from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., and that is virtual. So there's tons of ways to get involved. Make sure that you check out our website to figure out how you can stay connected and plugged into the QualLab. So with that, thank you so much for joining. Please visit our website, follow us on Twitter or X, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or just email us if you have questions or want to engage further. Thank you all.